Exorcism, possession, and the cry of the priest Maledicti Diaboli Exeabeo, words that give rise to images of mysterious church rituals of battle with mystical evil in mind. It turns out that this is possible even in our time. But how? Science calls into question the existence of supernatural forces, while every year there are only more cases of possession. Hello everyone, my name is Peter Cry. Today we will talk about new, previously unknown facts in the most terrible and creepy cases of exorcism in history. The subject of possession by Satan, the stories that demons can inhabit a person without his consent, should be lost in the past or disappear altogether, remaining only in the memories of religious fanatics, horror movies, and ancient legends. However, surprisingly, things are completely different. According to the Catholic Church, Islam, and even psychiatry, there are catastrophically many cases of so-called possession by demonic entities. Even world-famous stars become obsessed, who, according to conspiracy theorists, worship the devil, which gives them popularity, power, and money. According to Beyoncé, one day an entity appeared in her, the personality something called Sasha Fierce. Among the many frightening stories of exorcism, some of the most creepy and amazing are very difficult to refute. Cases that psychiatry does not want to deal with, science cannot explain, and that the church wants to forget. It's time to tell you about them. Long ago, in 1949, a terrible event took place in a small town in the United States, which became the basis for the book that would later turn into the famous movie The Exorcist. To this day, this movie is the most frightening in cinema history, according to the audience. The event that turned the world of 14-year-old Robbie Mannheim upside down was his acquaintance with a board created to communicate with the other dimensions during a session of spiritualism. This board belonged to his adored Aunt Harriet, who was fond of mysticism and often looked into the metaphysical world. Raised in a strict Lutheran family, after being acquainted with spiritualism, Robbie Mannheim was doomed. Then only hell awaited him. 10 days later, after Aunt Harriet left Robbie Mannheim's house and returned to St. Louis, she died under mysterious circumstances. The sudden death of his beloved aunt was a heavy blow for Robbie. Full of despair, he decided to turn to the Ouija board to talk to her, hoping that she would answer from the afterlife. After this, a terrible series of strange events began, described in the book and later in the movie The Exorcist. It all started on a night that Robbie spent at his grandmother's house. Then they heard strange sounds. Someone seemed to be walking around the attic, after which the icons depicting Christ and the Virgin Mary began to vibrate, stagger, and fall from the walls. Robbie suddenly felt unwell and started acting strangely. The next day, doctors and psychiatrists examined him, but they could not determine the cause of the boy's strange behavior and sudden fears. All examinations showed that he was healthy. Subsequently, the family and the priest of the Lutheran Church will witness the re-emergence of demonic activity already in the home of Robbie Mannheim's family. With the roar, the furniture moved by itself, and the monstrous low growl of some terrible creature whose position could not be determined was heard from everywhere. The windows opened, hitting the walls, breaking the glass. Robbie's face changed beyond recognition, becoming demonically evil. His behavior was frightening and strange. Not surprisingly, the family, frightened and confused by the sudden horror that filled their home, invited a priest. For several days he watched the boy, wanting to understand whether this was a true obsession or just a teenager's hysteria. When Robbie began to growl, speaking in an inhuman voice in incomprehensible otherworldly languages, it was decided to start an exorcism. The ritual of exile led to the beginning of an absolute nightmare. Satan defeated Robbie, and the teenager's body became a hostage of an entity, turning into an obedient rag doll. Unable to control himself, Robbie did everything Satan told him to. One day, trembling in convulsions, the exhausted boy jumped up and began drawing something on his white sheet. It was a map of hell. In Robbie, despite the ritual, which lasted more than 1 hour and more than 1 day, evil grew. With its strength, the teenager one day managed to throw the priest away from him so hard and so far that he broke his nose. Grabbing the priest's hand, after that the boy growled, "I am the devil himself." After this incident, the decision was made to tie Robbie's body to the bed so that he could not escape. The family and the priest continued to fight evil to expel the infernal entity, continuing day after day, sometimes without even taking a break for sleep. During these 2 months, the Lutheran priest tried to have Robbie repeat the prayer after him to cast out Satan, but nothing came of it. Satan resisted, trying to plague and kill the boy, who had no rest day or night. His body was constantly in pain and his hands twisted and cracked behind his back. When mystical symbols appeared on Robbie's body and words began to appear, it became clear how the devil ended up in the body of helpless child. The words St. Louis appeared on his back and chest, the city where lived and suddenly died after spiritualistic games his beloved Aunt Harriet. Every day and every attempt to perform the ceremony and get Robbie to read the prayer from beginning to end was saturated with incredible animal fear emanating from everyone around. In one of the most terrifying moments during the ritual, the exorcist priest and his assistants had to experience something so terrible that it was difficult to describe in words. At the moment when the priest shouted out the words of the Roman ritual, Robbie, who was on the bed, convulsing, soared into the air together with the bed. However, hope did not leave Robbie and the priest, who at all costs wanted to help and free the child. As Robbie later claimed, the archangel Michael came to him and entered into a fight with the devil. Fighting with the evil spirits for several days, he helped the boy to say aloud a prayer of liberation to the end. At the moment when Robbie said a few last words of prayer, along with the priests and assistants surrounding him, Robbie was released. Satan left his tormented pale gray body and the boy was released. When the great evil left the boy, words appeared on his chest and stomach, the last message of the defeated Satan. Those words were evil and hell. The world knew about this story thanks to anonymous reports published in the local newspaper. Subsequently, the content of these messages was confirmed by eyewitnesses. Only one question remains. Why does evil torture innocent children? What if there is something that evil pumps out of people not only from possessed, but from all? What if it is something that is the most important thing that a person has, and a person must keep it for himself in order to miracles to be performed? My book, Samael Satan's Biography, is a mystical thriller that will answer all these questions. The main question, who is Satan really? After reading this book, I guarantee that you will not remain indifferent to this story. Indeed, thanks to the plot, this book captured the hearts of many readers, and critics having received more than 90% of positive reviews. The link to the book will be in the description below this video. But what about other cases of true possession? Because this is far from the only one, and I will tell you that it was only a warm-up compared to the horror that will come next. In 1936, a cryptic article appeared in Time magazine about a woman who had suffered from demonic possession for many years. This woman was the only person who happened to go through the ritual of exorcism twice in her life, with a break of tens of years. Emma's eerie story tells about an exorcism ritual performed by Father Theophilus Reisinger, a man who against his will became America's most famous exorcist. Among the huge number of exorcism sessions that he conducted in his life, among all the battles with mystical evil in which he participated, in his own words, the case with Emma Schmidt, everything that happened to her was the most terrible thing that he experienced. The case of Emma Schmidt attention is the most well-documented episode of the exorcism of all on earth. That's probably why it's the most intimidating. Plunging into Emma's past, we learn about her tragic childhood. Nothing is known about her mother, but her father, Jacob, is a cruel and ruthless man who tirelessly tortured his own daughter. He drank and hated everything religious. It was rumored that he often crossed the boundaries of morality with his own daughter. Emma grew up far from religious spirituality. However, despite the fact that her father was against it, she strove for the good and the divine. Life was not kind to Emma. Physical and spiritual evil seemed to surround her from all sides since childhood, following her, trying to take over her mind and soul. Her aunt, Mina, is a very mysterious and sinister figure. She could not stand Emma and did not love her at all. There were numerous rumors about Aunt Mina that she was actually a witch and moreover the mistress of Jacob, her own brother. As it turns out, later these connections with the darkness of Aunt Mina may be the most critical key to understanding the terrible future events that await Emma. The demonic evil did not depart from her, not for a moment, not in childhood, not in adulthood. The first exorcism ritual was performed when Emma was only 14 years old. Her soul was covered by darkness. She plunged into depression and thoughts of suicide. Previously, when the girl was having a hard time and could not find understanding and help from people, she went to church where she could always feel and find peace of mind. Now, she couldn't even cross the threshold of the temple. The disgusting demonic voices in her head constantly pursued Emma to do something wild and bad, discrediting everything concerning the church and God. With the voices, visions began to come to her, where terrible creatures spoke to her, convincing her that they controlled her whole life. She needs to come to terms and do what they tell her. Emma's life was completely dominated by darkness. She did not want to put up with this. The only thing left for her was to turn to Father Theophilus to help her to get rid of her obsession with something dark and evil that was eating away her soul. After the first exorcism ritual was performed, the young girl managed to free herself from evil, after which she began to live a normal human life where there is no place for hellish demons that creep imperceptibly into human souls. However, many years later, when Emma matured, the darkness returned to her body with renewed vigor, suddenly destroying her life and turning into hell in just a few days. This time, the children of darkness began to control the body and the mind of the girl many times stronger, endlessly showing her terrible pictures of what the hell looks like and ordering her to kill innocent people. In search of salvation, Emma again decided to find Father Theophil Reisinger so that he would perform an exorcism ritual over her. When she managed to find him, she begged on her knees to save her from darkness and hell. After Father Theophilus Reisinger proved to the church that Emma was not mentally ill but really possessed, he received permission to perform an exorcism. After that, there was no turning back. Ahead of Emma was an incomparable nightmare. Being an experienced demon possession fighter, Father Theophilus Reisinger decided to conduct the ritual away from the city, from human ears and eyes, knowing what awaited him. He locked himself behind thick stone walls and powerful oak doors in a room located in the basement. And even that didn't help, because people said after everything was over that they heard screams coming from the monastery. Father Theophilus, who decided to divide the ritual into 3 stages, was assisted during the exorcism by a large group of nuns who lived in the monastery. When everything was finally ready for battle, the nuns laid Emma on the bed and tied her to it, fastening her clothes tightly so she could not break out and tear it. Before the Roman ritual started, Father Theophilus Reisinger began to read a prayer. As soon as the prayer began, Emma seemed to fall into a trance, after which she closed her eyes and fell asleep. The nuns, wanting to check if everything was alright with Emma, tried to open her eyelids, but they didn't succeed no matter how hard they tried. As soon as the priest spoke the first words of the exorcism ritual, Emma broke free and flew into the air, rushing to the doors and scratching them with her nails. Seeing this horror, the nuns clung to the ground, and only Father Theophilus showed courage, continuing to utter the sacred lines. Not once during the exorcism session did the nuns hear a terrible screams coming from Emma's lips, which could not be compared with anything earthly and human. One of the nuns later shared her memory, saying that this sound resembled an infernal choir assembled by Satan. At the time of one of the exorcism sessions, Father Theophil experienced a terrible event that he could not forget until the end of his days. Reading prayers, he suddenly saw Lucifer standing next to Emma in a fiery crown and with flaming sword in his hands. Beelzebub was near him. This terrifying mystical spectacle lasted for about an hour. The forces of good and evil clashed in the fierce battle, and Father Theophilus Reisinger did everything possible not to retreat in the face of a terrible and powerful enemy. Some sessions of the ritual continued for 3 days without a break. The exorcism and the struggle for the life of Emma Schmidt lasted 23 days. During this time, the nuns who helped Father Theophilus noticed that Father seemed to have aged 20 years during these days. In the process of endless exorcism, Emma, emaciated, constantly vomited a strange liquid, now black, now white. Once she even doused Father Theophilus with a strange, thick white foam. Emma's body sometimes turned red. It grew to an enormous size, becoming so heavy that the metal bed cracked under it. At some point, finally, in the last 3 days of the ritual, suddenly something changed. The evil that sat in the unfortunate girl admitted that there were many demons inside her, and that they were there because her father cursed her, giving the evil access inside. When the demons inside the girls lost their power, Emma suddenly flew up into the air. She collapsed to the floor, opening her mouth wide, shouting the names of all the demons that were in her and that finally left her tortured soul. It was her father Jacob, the witch Aunt Mina, and even Judas Iscariot. They all tried to drag Emma's soul to hell, but they failed. The forces of light won. Lucifer himself and Beelzebub were defeated by fighting America's most famous exorcist, Father Theophilus Reisinger. And now, what if I tell you that this is far from the last case and far from the most terrible among the expulsions of demons from a person? Everything before this was just a preparation to tell you about absolute evil. Meet Michael Taylor, a simple guy from England, an exemplary family man and a Christian who did not shy away from religion and faith and who respected the church. His life was beautiful and measured with a wife and 5 children, but sometimes life changes suddenly. This is exactly what happened to Michael when he began to attend the mysterious meetings of the organization that suddenly appears in his town. This organization was called the Group of Followers of Christianity. It was led to the mysterious and attractive Marie. There, while attending meetings, Michael experienced trance and glossolalia techniques. This is when suddenly the Holy Spirit rises on you. In the other words, something takes over and the person begins to speak in an unknown languages. These practices opened the door in his soul to dangerous, dark, otherworldly forces. Immersion in the metaphysical physical world and regular attendance at the meetings of a mysterious religious organization gave Michael an unusual feeling of belonging, strength, and touch to something mystical and extraordinary. In addition, his mind was completely taken over by the organization's leader, the charismatic Marie. Michael, unable to think of anything else but a new extraordinary mystical experience, did not even notice how dangerous changes in character and behavior began to occur in him, which only got worse with each new day. He often lashed out at his wife, children, and friends, feeling dark entities in himself who insisted on terrible deeds. He admitted this without hesitation. Prayers and Bible reading, self-control did not give anything. Frequent visits to the group of Christian followers and constant entry into a trance only made worse the situation, which according to Michael's relatives began to go to disaster. After all, scandals with the whole world around became simply continuous and more often ended with Michael's desire to use physical force and even kill. At some point, his wife called on the local church to ban her husband from attending meetings of a mysterious organization that suddenly arose, as well as communication with Marie, who like witch manipulated everyone who found herself in her line of sight. Excommunication from a group of followers of Christianity did nothing, and as Michael himself admitted, there is more and more evil and anger in him. All this was realized by the family and Michael himself and the church that he needed urgent help. Therefore, after contacting the local church for help, it was decided to conduct an exorcism ritual. The heavy and exhausting ritual lasted for many hours, and during this time, from Michael, who opened the door to darkness through an altered state of consciousness, the demons of incest, atrocities, blasphemy, and evil were exorcised. According to the confessions of those who were present, the ritual itself was so difficult and destructive that Father Peter Vincent lost all his strength at some moment and stopped it, letting Michael go home. The priest decided to continue tomorrow, however, not all demons were expelled from the possessed. This was confirmed by those who conducted the exorcism, which means that tragic consequences were inevitable. After all, there are still 3 demons left in Michael, namely madness, murder, and violence. Each of these demons was ready to willing to strike the final hit, making their plan a reality. Returning home from church smiling and confident that everything is fine now, Michael suddenly killed his wife and dog. He did it as if they were killed by some wild animal, a terrible beast. He tore out his wife's eyes, tongue, and almost tore off her face. Fortunately, the children were not at home, otherwise they would have met the same fate. The police found Michael unconscious near his house, covered in blood. Apparently, it was necessary to finish the ritual, no matter how difficult it was. After all, it was the demons of madness, murder, and violence that showed themselves in all their glory. Incredibly, and even surprisingly, the court found him insane and therefore innocent for the terrible crime that he committed. He was placed in a psychiatric hospital. He was released 2 years later, as the doctors claimed successful healing, but this was only a lie and a temporary delusion of the part of doctors and judges. The demonic forces did not leave him. After threats and harassment of a very young girl, he was again placed in a mental hospital, this time forever. True cases of demon possession are rare, but they do exist. These are forces that can influence our consciousness and behavior. But why should evil torture people with such cruelty? Cruelty for cruelty? Is there a great metaphysical mystery behind this, which we have not yet known? This and other questions I reveal in my video, which you can watch right now. See ya!